It was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. The church bells were ringing, champagne was flowing, 200 guests were waiting with cameras ready to capture the moment he'd remember forever. But in less than 60 seconds, everything David Richardson believed about love, family, and loyalty would shatter like glass hitting concrete. Because when he opened that door looking for his bride, what he found wasn't cold feet or wedding jitters. What he found was a betrayal so raw, so calculated, that it would tear apart two families and leave a small Virginia town asking one haunting question: how long had they all been blind? This isn't a story about a wedding gone wrong. This is a story about the lies we tell ourselves, the people we trust without question, and the moment when everything you thought was real reveals itself to be nothing but smoke and mirrors. And I need to warn you, what you're about to hear actually happened. The names have been changed, but the pain, the deception, and the aftermath are all too real. Before we go any further, ask yourself this. Could you recognize betrayal if it was happening right in front of you? Would you see the signs, or would you be too close to the people you love to notice? Because that's exactly what happened to David. For years, he missed the stolen glances, the whispered phone calls, the convenient excuses. And the woman in white that day, the one everyone assumed was nervous about becoming a wife, she wasn't anxious about marrying the wrong man. She was terrified of getting caught with the right one. The brother he'd looked up to his entire life, the man who taught him how to tie a tie and throw a football, wasn't standing beside him as his best man out of love. He was there for an entirely different reason. So how does something this twisted happen on what's supposed to be the most sacred day of someone's life? How long had it been going on? And more importantly, how did a groom discover the truth in the worst possible way at the worst possible moment? To understand that Saturday in June, we need to go back 6 years to a coffee shop in Richmond, Virginia, where David Richardson first met Renee Harper. David was 31 at the time, a mechanical engineer with a steady job at a manufacturing plant, the kind of guy who showed up early, stayed late, and never caused drama. He wasn't flashy. He drove a 7-year-old Honda, lived in a modest townhouse, and spent his weekends hiking or helping his parents with yard work. Reliable, predictable, safe. Renee was different. She walked into that coffee shop like she owned it, wearing a red dress that turned heads and confidence that filled the room. She was 28, working in pharmaceutical sales, always on her phone closing deals, always talking about the next big opportunity. When she laughed, everyone around her laughed. When she walked into a room, people noticed. And when she locked eyes with David that afternoon while waiting for her latte, something clicked. Or at least that's what David thought. They started dating within a week. Within 3 months, she'd moved into his townhouse. Within a year, they were talking about marriage, kids, and growing old together. David's friends told him he was lucky. His co-workers said he'd found a woman out of his league. Even his parents, who were usually cautious about everything, seemed charmed by Renee's energy and ambition. But there was one person who seemed more than charmed. David's older brother, Marcus. Marcus Richardson was everything David wasn't. He was 38, 6'2", with the kind of charm that made strangers feel like old friends within minutes. He owned a successful commercial real estate firm, drove a black Mercedes, and had a different woman on his arm every few months. Marcus had always been the golden child, the one their father bragged about at barbecues, the one who made their mother beam with pride. And David never resented it. In fact, he admired Marcus, looked up to him, wanted to be more like him. So, when Renee started joining their family dinners and Marcus began paying more attention to her, asking about her work, complimenting her dress, offering business advice, David didn't think twice. He thought his brother was just being supportive, just being a good big brother. What he didn't see were the text messages that started 3 months into his relationship with Renee. Innocent at first, just Marcus checking in, asking if she needed anything, offering to help her with a work contact. Then the texts became more frequent, more personal. Late-night messages asking if she was happy, if David was treating her right, if she ever wondered what her life could be like with someone more ambitious, more successful, more like him. And Renee, who loved attention the way some people love oxygen, didn't shut it down. She responded. She engaged. She started meeting Marcus for coffee when David was at work, lunch when he was out of town, drinks when he thought she was at a work event. By the time David proposed 2 years into their relationship, Marcus and Renee had already crossed every line that mattered. But here's the thing that makes this story even more painful. This wasn't Marcus's first time doing something like this. When David was in high school, he dated a girl named Sarah for almost a year. She broke up with him out of nowhere, no explanation, just tears and an apology. 2 months later, she was dating Marcus. When David started his first real job after college, he worked under a manager who became a mentor, someone he respected deeply. That mentor ended up leaving the company after Marcus poached him for his own firm with a bigger salary. Every time David built something, every time he found something that mattered, Marcus found a way to take it, to prove he could, to remind David who was really in control. And now with Renee, Marcus was doing it again, but this time the stakes were higher. This time it wasn't just about winning, it was about destroying. And David had no idea what was coming. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Destroying. And David had no idea what was coming. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Saturday, June 15th. The venue was a restored barn on the outskirts of Charlottesville, surrounded by rolling hills and oak trees that looked like they'd been planted specifically for wedding photos. The weather was perfect, 78 degrees with a light breeze that carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and wildflowers. Guests started arriving at 2 in the afternoon, women in pastel dresses, men in summer suits, children running around with their ties already loosened. David's parents sat in the front row, his mother clutching tissues, his father looking proud in a way that made David's chest tighten. Marcus stood beside David at the altar, straightening his tie, cracking jokes to calm his brother's nerves. He looked relaxed, confident, like he didn't have a care in the world. The music started. Everyone stood, and Renee appeared at the end of the aisle in a dress that cost more than David's first car, her smile bright, her eyes locked on his. For a moment, David forgot to breathe. This was it. This was everything he'd worked for, everything he'd dreamed about. A family, a future, a life built on trust and love. Except 30 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start, Renee disappeared. At first, no one panicked. Brides get nervous. They need a moment alone, a chance to breathe, to let the enormity of the day settle in. But after 10 minutes, David started to worry. He asked one of the bridesmaids to check the bridal suite. She came back shaking her head. Not there. He checked the reception hall, the parking lot, even the bathrooms. Nothing. His phone buzzed. A text from Renee. "I just need a minute. Don't worry. I love you." Relief washed over him, but something felt off. The message was short, clipped, not like her at all. He walked back toward the venue, trying to shake the unease crawling up his spine, when he noticed a side door near the storage room slightly ajar. He pushed it open, thinking maybe she'd gone outside for air, maybe she was hiding from the chaos for just a few minutes. But what he found wasn't his bride taking a breath. What he found was Renee pressed against the wall, Marcus's hands on her waist, their lips locked in a kiss that wasn't hesitant or awkward. It was familiar, practiced, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. David stood there frozen, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe Marcus was comforting her, maybe she was upset, and he was just being a brother. But then Renee opened her eyes and saw him standing there, and the look on her face wasn't shock. It wasn't guilt. It was resignation. like she'd been caught doing something she knew was wrong but had convinced herself didn't matter. Marcus turned, saw David, and for just a second, something like satisfaction flickered across his face before he covered it with fake concern. David didn't yell, he didn't cry, he didn't throw a punch or demand an explanation. He just stared at them, his mind trying to reconcile the two people he loved most in the world with the image in front of him, and then he turned and walked away. Behind him, he could hear Renee calling his name, her voice rising in panic, but he didn't stop. He walked through the venue, past the guests who were still laughing and taking photos, past his parents who asked if everything was okay, past the altar where Marcus was supposed to stand beside him, and he kept walking until he reached his car. He got in, started the engine, and drove. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay there, couldn't breathe in that space, couldn't exist in a world where everything he believed had just been ripped away. Back at the venue, chaos erupted. Guests whispered, bridesmaids cried. Someone called the police thinking there'd been an accident. Renee sat in the bridal suite, mascara running down her face, insisting it wasn't what it looked like, that David had misunderstood, that she loved him and only him. Marcus told anyone who would listen that it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, that David was overreacting. But the guests had seen David's face. They'd seen him leave, and slowly, the pieces started to come together. The way Marcus and Renee always stood too close at family dinners, the way they'd disappear at the same time during parties, the way Marcus always had an excuse to stop by David's house when he knew David wouldn't be home. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a pattern. And everyone had missed it. If you're still watching, drop a comment saying, "I'm still here." Let's see who's following this unbelievable story. David didn't go home that night, or the next. He drove for hours, his phone buzzing non-stop with calls from Renee, Marcus, his parents, friends who'd heard what happened and wanted to check on him. He turned it off. He couldn't hear their voices, couldn't stomach their excuses or apologies or attempts to fix something that was beyond repair. He ended up at a motel 2 hours outside Charlottesville, a run-down place with flickering neon lights and walls so thin he could hear the couple next door arguing about money. He lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last 2 years. Every time Renee said she was working late. Every time Marcus offered to help her with something. Every family dinner where they sat across from each other, smiling, laughing, pretending. How long had it been going on? How many times had they been together while he was at work, while he was planning a future, while he was saving money for a ring and a wedding and a life that was already a lie? And the worst part, the part that made his chest feel like it was caving in, was that he still loved her. Despite everything, despite the image burned into his brain, he still wanted to believe there was an explanation, a reason, something that would make it hurt less. Back in Charlottesville, the story spread fast. Small towns don't keep secrets, especially when the secret involves a wedding, a cheating bride, and brothers turning on each other. Within 48 hours, everyone knew. The local news picked it up, running a segment about a wedding that ended in scandal. Social media exploded. People who'd been at the wedding posted photos, videos, theories about what really happened. Some defended Renee, saying David must have been a bad partner, that there were always two sides to every story. Others tore into Marcus, calling him a snake, a predator, a man who'd betrayed his own blood. David's parents were devastated. His mother cried for days, blaming herself for not seeing the signs, for welcoming Renee into their family without asking harder questions. His father stopped speaking to Marcus entirely, refusing to take his calls, telling anyone who asked that he only had one son now. The family was fractured, broken, and there was no easy way to put it back together. Renee tried to explain herself in a series of tearful phone calls to mutual friends. She claimed she'd loved David, that she'd planned to marry him, but that Marcus had pursued her relentlessly, that she'd felt trapped, that she'd made a terrible mistake, but it didn't mean she didn't care. Her story changed depending on who she was talking to. Sometimes Marcus had manipulated her. Sometimes she'd been lonely and David hadn't been there. Sometimes it was just a physical thing, something that didn't mean anything, something she regretted the moment it started. But none of it added up. None of it explained why she'd continued the affair for years, why she'd stood at that altar knowing what she'd done, why she'd kissed Marcus 30 minutes before, promising to love David forever. Marcus, on the other hand, played the victim. He told people that Renee had come on to him, that he'd tried to resist, but she was persistent, that he'd been weak, but he never meant to hurt his brother. He showed up at David's parents' house, begging for forgiveness, insisting it was a mistake and that family was more important than anything. David's father slammed the door in his face, and then, just when people thought the story couldn't get worse, the police got involved. Not because of the affair, that wasn't illegal, but because someone had filed a complaint about harassment. Renee claimed Marcus had been threatening her, telling her that if she didn't keep quiet about certain details, he'd ruin her career, her reputation, everything she'd built. Marcus denied it, said she was lying to save herself. But investigators started digging. They pulled phone records, text messages, emails, and what they found painted a picture that no one expected. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just two people giving in to temptation. This was calculated, premeditated, a long con that had been running for years. And at the center of it all was a video that no one was supposed to see. 3 weeks after the wedding that never happened, a detective named Sarah Brennan sat in a windowless room at the Charlottesville Police Department, reviewing security footage from the venue. The venue owner had installed cameras throughout the property after a series of thefts the previous year. Most of them were obvious, mounted in plain sight to deter crime. But there was one camera, a small, discreet lens tucked into the corner of a storage hallway, that almost no one knew about, and that camera had been recording the day of the wedding. Detective Brennan watched the footage in silence, her expression unreadable. The video showed Marcus and Renee entering the hallway together, laughing, touching, completely at ease with each other. This wasn't a spontaneous moment. This wasn't a last-minute mistake. They'd planned to meet there. And then the camera captured something even more damning. A conversation. Renee leaning against the wall, Marcus standing close, and the two of them talking in low voices. The audio was faint but clear enough. Renee said, "After today, we won't have to hide anymore. Once this is done, he'll move on and we can stop pretending." Marcus responded, "You sure he won't suspect anything?" Renee laughed. "He's too trusting. He never suspects anything." Detective Brennan leaned back in her chair, processing what she'd just heard. This wasn't an affair born out of passion or loneliness. This was a plan. Renee had been using David, and Marcus had been helping her do it. But why? What did they gain from marrying David if they were already together? The answer came a week later when investigators pulled financial records. Renee had been in debt, serious debt. Credit cards maxed out, student loans unpaid, collections agencies calling her daily. She needed money. And David, stable, reliable. David, with his decent job and savings account, was the solution. If she married him, she'd have access to his finances, his stability, his life insurance policies. And if things didn't work out, she'd walk away with half of everything in a divorce. But Marcus wasn't just some guy she was seeing on the side. Marcus had been funding her lifestyle for years, paying her rent when she fell behind, covering her car payments, giving her cash for trips and clothes and dinners she couldn't afford. He'd invested in her, and she'd promised him that once she married David, once she had access to real money, she'd pay him back, with interest. The video footage continued. After their conversation, after their kiss, after David walked in and found them, the camera captured Marcus and Renee standing there for a few more seconds, and Marcus smiled. Not a guilty smile, not an embarrassed smile, a satisfied smile, like he'd just won something. Renee, panicked, asked, "What do we do now?" And Marcus, calm as ever, said, "We stick to the plan. He'll forgive you. He always forgives." But David didn't forgive, and that's when everything started to unravel. Detective Brennan brought the footage to the district attorney, who reviewed it alongside the financial records, the text messages, the phone calls. There wasn't enough evidence to charge anyone with a crime. Fraud required proof of intent and damages, and David hadn't actually lost money yet, but there was enough to expose the truth. The local news ran a follow-up story. The video, edited to protect certain identities, was leaked online. And suddenly, the narrative flipped. Renee wasn't a woman who made a mistake. She was a con artist. And Marcus wasn't a brother who'd fallen for his sibling's fiancée. He was a manipulator who'd orchestrated the whole thing. The revelation destroyed what was left of Marcus's reputation. His real estate firm lost clients. Business partners distanced themselves. Friends stopped returning his calls. He released a public statement claiming the video was taken out of context, that his relationship with Renee had been genuine, that he'd never intended to hurt anyone, but no one believed him. His social media accounts were flooded with comments calling him a liar, a fraud, a man who'd betrayed his own family for money and ego. Within 6 months, his business collapsed. He sold his Mercedes, moved out of his downtown loft, and took a job managing a small property firm 2 states away. He tried to reach out to David one last time, sending a handwritten letter that David never opened. The envelope sat on David's kitchen counter for weeks before he finally threw it away. Some betrayals don't get second chances. Renee disappeared even faster. 2 months after the wedding, she left Virginia entirely. No forwarding address, no goodbye to mutual friends. She deleted her social media accounts, changed her phone number, and vanished. Rumors circulated that she'd moved to California, that she was working under a different name, that she'd started over somewhere. No one knew her story. David never tried to find her. He didn't want closure. He didn't want an apology. He just wanted her gone. For David, the months after the wedding were the hardest of his life. He took a leave of absence from work, spent days in his townhouse, blinds closed, barely eating, replaying everything in his mind. His friends checked on him, brought him food, sat with him even when he didn't want to talk. His parents visited every week, his mother cooking meals he didn't touch, his father sitting beside him in silence, because sometimes silence is the only comfort that works. Therapy helped. Slowly. A counselor who specialized in trauma and betrayal walked him through the anger, the grief, the confusion, helped him understand that what happened wasn't his fault, that trust isn't weakness, that loving someone deeply doesn't make you naive, it makes you human. And gradually, painfully, David started to rebuild. He went back to work, reconnected with old friends, started hiking again, spending weekends in the mountains where the air was clean and the world felt bigger than his pain. And then, a year after the wedding, he did something unexpected. He started a support group for people who'd been betrayed by someone they loved. A small gathering at a community center, just 5 people at first, sitting in a circle, sharing their stories. Some had been cheated on. Some had been lied to by family members. Some had been scammed by people they trusted. But they all understood the same thing. Betrayal doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your sense of reality, and healing from that takes time. The group grew. Within 2 years, David was running monthly meetings with over 30 regular attendees. He spoke at local events about trust, forgiveness, and the long road to recovery. People reached out to him from across the country, thanking him for creating a space where they didn't have to pretend they were okay. And somewhere in that process, David found something he didn't expect. Purpose. The wedding that destroyed his life had given him a way to help others rebuild theirs. And while he never forgot what happened, while the scar never fully disappeared, he learned to carry it differently, not as a weight, but as a reminder that even the worst moments can lead to something meaningful. Marcus tried to reach out one more time, 3 years after the wedding. He showed up at one of David's support group meetings, sitting in the back, waiting until everyone else had left. David saw him, walked over, and Marcus, looking older, more tired, said, "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." David looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I'm not carrying this anymore." And he walked away. That was the last time they ever spoke. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you were in David's position, if you walked in on that moment, saw the two people you loved most in the world destroying everything you believed in, what would you have done? Would you have confronted them? Would you have walked away like David did? Or would you have stayed and demanded answers, tried to fix something that was already too far gone? And here's the harder question. If you were one of the guests at that wedding, if you'd noticed the signs, the stolen glances, the way Marcus and Renee seemed a little too comfortable around each other, would you have said something? Or would you have convinced yourself it wasn't your place, that you were reading too much into it, that surely no one would do something that cruel? Because that's what makes this story so devastating. It wasn't just Marcus and Renee who failed David. It was everyone who saw the cracks and chose to look away. Everyone who thought family loyalty meant protecting secrets instead of protecting the people we love. David's story didn't end with betrayal. It ended with healing, with purpose, with a man who turned his worst day into a reason to help others survive theirs. But the scars are still there. The trust he lost didn't come back, and the family that was broken never fully healed. Some things, once shattered, can't be put back together the same way. They can only be rebuilt into something new, and maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that betrayal happens, we all know it does, but that survival is possible. That the door you never wanted to open, the truth you never wanted to see, doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a different one, a harder one, a more honest one, but a story worth telling. If you made it this far, comment, "Trust is broken." Let's see who really stayed till the end. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real people facing impossible situations and finding a way through, hit that subscribe button. Because next time, we're diving into the bride who faked her own kidnapping to escape her wedding. And trust me, you won't believe how far some people will go to avoid saying "I do."